take care of that.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's Footsteps to Mars Hangout. My name is Tony Darnell from deepastronomy.com, and yes, that chime you heard was from Harley's email, and he promises that he's going to fix that because I realized just how annoying that is. Thank you, Harley, because we can't.
No YouTube either. No YouTube either.
Okay? I don't understand how you can stand that. I mean, it's like every time you get an email,
he doesn't get emails that often. It makes him happy.
Not anymore.
All right. Well, anyway, so today the title of our hangout is called Keeping Humans Productive, and that is a huge area to cover. But what we're going to be talking about is we're back on the topic of the physiological, the health and performance issues of human beings being in space. You hear NASA say all the time that space is hard, building rockets is hard, building hardware is difficult, but because space is a very harsh environment, and human beings were kind of evolved to live nice and cozy here on Earth. We need certain things that, while they might be in space, they aren't necessarily in the same concentrations that we need. For example, gravity. We kind of need gravity to get along nicely on this planet. We also need food and water and oxygen and all kinds of other things. That's very helpful to have out in space, but it all sort of takes its toll on the human body. And so a lot of people have been working for a long time to figure out what we can do to survive in space healthy, to keep our mental facilities about us, and as well as things, the normal stuff like food and other human needs, and we'll get to those in just a minute. But before I get started, I want to just remind you guys that we are broadcasting on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Periscope, so we hope you'll interact with our guests. I'm going to introduce my co-host, one of my co-hosts, Dr. Harley Thronson, who's going to tell you a little bit more about these Hangouts. Go ahead, Harley.
Yeah, so welcome, everybody. We do the first Thursday of every month, we have Footsteps to Mars, and an opportunity to chat with folks who are working on various aspects of getting humans safely and productively to Mars. For the next couple of Hangouts, the last Hangout and the next couple of Hangouts, we'll be talking about human physiology, biology, the particular nature of the challenges and the possible solutions to the challenges and the possible solutions to solving those challenges and keeping humans alive on that long journey to Mars and back. So that's the theme behind it. These are intended to be pretty timely because over the next, roughly decade, there's going to be an armada fleet of robotic missions going to Mars from the U.S., from UAE, China, ESA, Russia, India. The world's spacefaring nations are turning to Mars. And with these robotic missions, we view them as a prelude to human missions to Mars as early as the early 2030s. So the issue of how you keep people alive, happy, functioning well is of increasingly critical importance. We're going to be hearing more about that today.
Okay, good. And so let me go ahead and introduce our guests. I'm sorry, I was looking at Facebook. It looks kind of wonky over there, but I was just trying to see what the stream was looking like there. So we have with us again guests from last month where we talked about some of the human physiological challenges in space. But joining me back again this month is, let me get him up here. Here we go. Dr. Arnauld Nicogossian. He's from the George Mason University, and he's back with us. Welcome, Arnold. It's good to have you back with us.
Thank you for having us, and happy Star Wars Day, whatever.
Oh yeah, I was going to do that, but I'm glad you did it for me. So
thank you for inviting us.
Yes. All right. Yes, for those of you, I'm sure you all know by now, it is May the 4th, but I just can't bring myself to say it. I don't know. You say it, Alberto.
May the 4th be with you.
There you go. Thank you. Okay, good. All right. So welcome back, Arnold, and it's good to have you here. Also joining me is from the NASA Johnson Space Flight Center is Dr. Scott Smith. Hi, Scott. It's good to see you.
Welcome. Good afternoon. It's great to be here.
Good. Thank you. Also joining me is George Doarn from the University of Cincinnati again. And it was good to have you back, Chuck, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, good. So let's go ahead and so as Harley alluded to in the beginning there, we also didn't say, did you, that these are endorsed by the American Astronomicals and all of that? Did you do that?
We did not know. This is an activity that for the past several months has been mutually endorsed by the two AASs, the American Astronomical Society and the American Astronautical Society. They are not responsible for the opinions expressed in this show, but they do endorse and support this activity, for which we're very grateful.
That's right. So thank you for doing that. And so there are many ways for you to interact with us on the various Twitter verses. We're using Footsteps to Mars hashtag. I also see a lot of people in the YouTube live chat. Galaxia is back. Hi, Galaxia. And Adam Synergy, John Suffel. A lot of people here again. So please, we hope you'll interact with our guests and ask them lots of questions.
Is Rainbow Panda? Has Rainbow Panda joined us?
That's your boy. Harley just has favorites, doesn't he?
Yeah, they're all your children.
Yes, that's right. So okay. So anyway, thank you guys for joining us, and I'll be looking at the live chat as we go on. So let's get started, Arnold. Let's talk a little bit about the title is Keeping Humans Productive. Now, what do we mean by that? What are we talking about when we say keeping humans productive?
Well, keeping human productive, you need, keeping human productive, you need to have this similar accommodation like you have on Earth to have also in space, which is very difficult to recreate. That's why we are talking about that. And some of those are hygiene, nutrition, exercise, protecting against the environment, especially that there is a vacuum out there sometimes, low pressure and lack of oxygen. You said those, Tony. And one of the really major challenges, and also psychology. And one of the major challenges actually becoming how to provide people, how to take with you, or how to develop all those resources that you need to send people away from Earth when you cannot resupply them. And I am sure that Scott can talk better about that, about food and food production. But a lot of experiments on the space station are dealing today with food production. And I always joke that now that we have a 3D printer, we should never be hungry in space.
Agreed.
We can print pizza in space, but I will not ask what do you use in the ingredients.
I've heard of many things, but printing pizza is not one of them. Wow, that's... is that something you're working on, Scott, too?
Well, let me pass it on to Scott to talk about that.
Okay, Scott, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and also tell us a little bit about what your interests are at Johnson and what you're working on.
Okay, well, again, my name is Scott Smith. I'm the lead for the Nutritional Biochemistry Lab here at the Johnson Space Center. And in a sentence, our job is to keep astronauts healthy on space missions, be it a 6-month space mission, be it a 3-year space mission. From a nutritional point of view, our job is to keep them healthy. And, you know, when we talk about exploration, we always track back through history and talk about the fact that, you know, when you think about scurvy, scurvy killed more sailors than all other causes of death combined. And that was the lack of vitamin C, which is a single nutrient. And the trick with sending somebody off to Mars for 3 years is making sure that we know how much the body needs of each nutrient, that the food system contains those nutrients, that those foods are being consumed. And otherwise, if we run out of any given nutrient on a long duration mission, it's going to be a bad day. And our job, again, is to understand how nutrition works with the other biological systems and keep the body running. So it really, from literally vitamin A to zinc, there's not a nutrient that your body doesn't care about a lot. That when you are in a closed food system, in a can very far away from Earth, it becomes much more critical than you might imagine. And we've sort of gotten used to the fact that, you know, we go to the grocery store, we're exposed to a wide variety of foods and fruits and vegetables and fresh foods. and all that goes away when you blast off.
So, Scott, this is Alberto. Can I ask you a question? So, it just occurred to me, does the absorption of vitamins, let's say, change in microgravity environments? And do you have to compensate for that if it does?
We haven't seen any what I would call gross malabsorption, if you will. We have seen targeted changes. So calcium absorption, for example, will go down because secondary to the loss of calcium from the bones. Mm-hmm. But other than that, the GI tract seems to work a little bit slower. That is, food transits the intestines slower.
What's GI tract?
The stomach, the intestines, the gastrointestinal tract. So food moves through the body slower, which actually increases the chance for absorption.
Oh, I see.
Is that because of gravity or lack of it that it does that? Why does it go slower?
The short answer is we don't know. We think it's because of gravity that while the muscles will push food through the intestines, it just doesn't seem to do it as quick as it does on Earth. So there likely is a gravitational impact there.
Do we know, Scott? This is Harley. I'm curious about this, and this picks up sort of on what Alberto was asking. Are we all, or you nutritionists, or the nutritionists with whom you deal, are we confident that we know completely all the nutritional needs of the human being? End to end, A to Z?
No, we are not, and that's true on Earth. I mean, there are people doing research. There are people doing research trying to understand the role of nutrition in different environments and different people and different populations. And they update the recommended intakes every 5 to 10 years because we are still learning things. And spaceflight is a microcosm of that.
Right. And you have to compensate, I don't know, sorry, I keep asking because this is kind of fascinating, but you have to compensate also for sunlight difference and absorption, I guess, if you're in low Earth orbit or if you, as opposed to, a trip to Mars.
Indeed. Thank you for saying that. I was going to mention it. Go ahead.
Yeah, there you go.
Indeed, vitamin D is one of our bigger concerns, and vitamin D is the one thing that we provide supplement to the astronauts because we know the food system does not have enough vitamin D, and we know that they're not exposed to ultraviolet light, which is one of the ways that your body makes vitamin D. Yeah. So we do supplement with vitamin D.
And I understand Johnson Space Center is now working on a different type of lights, like a blue light, to make sure that there is adequate wake-sleep cycles, and also that the astronaut might produce some endogenous vitamin D, right?
Well, as I understand it, indeed, there are some lighting studies going on, and they recently installed the blue lights onboard station to help with circadian rhythms and to help with sleep, really. My understanding is that those are not ultraviolet lights, that those will not produce vitamin D. And that the risk there, I am often asked why don't we fly sun lamps to help stimulate vitamin D production? Right. And the risk there is that a little makes vitamin D, a lot makes skin cancer, and you have to be very careful not to cross that line.
We want to get there alive. Yeah,
but in general, I don't think that Hollywood did present very well those dark spacecrafts where people live, because psychologically they would have fallen apart unless they adapted to darkness. It will be a new species, right? Spacecraft are not that dark.
Which spacecraft are you talking about? Just any movie spacecraft?
Yeah, in the movies, like Aliens, it's all dark,
Like Alien, for example.
Okay.
But let's talk a little bit about that. Let me ask for a second, Scott. What about the cupola? Do they have a lot of windows? And do the astronauts spend a lot of time besides observing Earth to sunbathe there?
The windows are all shielded to protect them against ultraviolet light. And so they do enjoy spending time looking out the window at Earth. But that's not how they can't get vitamin D through those windows. On the Russian space station Mir, they had one quartz glass window that Shannon Lucid talked very openly about. She got permission from her flight surgeon to spend a little bit of time in front of that window one day when it was facing the sun. And she had sunglasses on, and she said she spent about 30 seconds in front of that window and got the worst sunburn of her life.
Wow.
Well, there are anecdotal reports that cosmonauts did get sunburns by those windows, and those windows do deteriorate over time.
Right.
So not enough light gets in.
Wow, I never even thought about that. That's pretty incredible. So let me get
try to surprise you, Tony.
Well, this is one of those topics where people, we know we want to go to Mars. We have a lot of excitement about getting there, but I don't think we really appreciate just how hard it's going to be on our bodies to get us out into just to spend any kind of time in space. And so I want to go back to the food issue for just a minute. And Yurik in Mazenot is asking a related question. He's asking, would it be viable to make a hydroponic station in distant orbit that could grow food and act as a resupply station if and once manned missions beyond the moon become more common? And so, Scott, I want to ask you, you're looking into getting food, what the nutritional requirements are, but how are we going to be getting the food in space? And to Yurik's question, is it possible to have some kind of stations out there with food in them?
Very briefly, so I work in the nutrition end of NASA, and our job is to define the requirements for the food system. And there are food technologists, food scientists, whose job it is to develop the food system that meets our requirements, that meets all the other requirements that are necessary for spaceflight. And, the first trips to Mars, we will send all of the food. We will likely grow some, maybe, pick and eat crops, things like lettuce and maybe tomatoes and small things that will supplement the food system. And then ultimately someday we will ramp that up to where we will grow larger and larger percentage of the food the crews eat. It's
so
going to take.
But are we talking like those things they ate? You have Apollo 11 picture behind you. Are we talking about those little packets and stuff that they're currently packaging up and eating now? Or is that the kind of food we're talking about?
It'll be a little bit. Well, it'll be a lot advanced from what's in the picture behind me.
Well, let's hope so.
We have made. The food science folks have made a lot of progress on food. So the food is much better than you might think, but it is still all shelf stable. We typically do not have freezers. We don't have refrigerators. Mm-hmm. So, imagine going to the grocery store and packing your pantry with everything you're going to eat for the next 6 months or the next 3 years. Right. And that becomes somewhat daunting. And
well, actually, there's a pretty good freezer there. You got one right out the window, but I suppose it's challenging to use it.
Indeed.
Okay. Well, what about? So, can any of you sort of address Yurik's question? Do any of you know about the possibility of maybe having a hydroponic station somewhere outside of the orbit of the moon, so that they can do it on the way, or get that food on the way, or are there maybe plans for getting some food on the surface and have it wait for the astronauts to arrive?
Yeah, both Russians and us were actually us recently, and Europeans are growing like lettuce and that type of legumes in space, mostly lettuce, and the astronauts were actually eating those. And the cultures for fresh food is ongoing on because to supplement and to supplement the current nutrition and resupplies, and also to prepare people to grow hydroponically or whatever means it is plants, and to actually accelerate the growth using the light type of activities. I don't know, Scott, you want to talk about that, or Chuck?
Well, again, you're absolutely right. The trick becomes lettuce. Lettuce is very easy to grow, which is why we tend to do it. But you have to eat an awful lot of lettuce. That's right. When you think about your protein requirements, your fat requirements, just getting enough calories it's very, very daunting. And if you talk about growing things like wheat and you're going to make bread, the amount of time required to harvest, grind, getting from a plant to a piece of bread takes a phenomenal amount of time and energy. So we will slowly do that, but it's going to take a long time.
That's true. Living off the land is a pretty it's a lot of work. I mean, we've been doing it for centuries, but it's still it takes up all your time. And so I guess I can see your point about wanting to have other sort of foods out there. Scott, let me just real quick ask you, what are the biggest challenges when it comes to food? Like, is it having enough protein? What are you worried the most about when you worry about sending these astronauts off with food? Is there a particular challenge that you find most worrisome or daunting?
The biggest challenge is getting crews to eat enough, making sure they're meeting their caloric requirements, their energy requirements. And when I meet with crews before flight, I tell them, if I could only tell you one thing, it's eat. That losing weight in spaceflight is not good. You lose more bone than you need to. You lose more muscle. There's a lot of issues that come along.
Why don't they eat? They just too busy? They just stressed out? Why don't they eat?
There's a few different things. One of the things at the base of it, though, I think, is that food settles differently in the stomach. So your signals of satiety, your stomach tells your brain you're full before you really are.
Yeah.
And again, we tell crews all the time, if you think you're eating enough and we're telling you you're not, then you need to do something about it. You either need to push more food in or eat more snacks or something.
Wow. So the fact that it's just you're eating, you're in weightlessness, the food's going down, it's kind of floating around still in your belly. It's already, as you pointed out, taking a little bit longer to digest this because things just aren't working the same as they would on Earth. And now they're just feeling full too. So malnutrition is, I suppose, a real worry. Chuck, let me ask you this question. You're a physician. You study these things all the time. So as a physician, what's your thought on that?
Well, I'm not, I'm not a physician. I'm a scientist, program manager type thing. Yeah.
I thought you were, I apologize.
No, but I think when you think about, I know the astronauts I've talked with over the past 30 years, taste is always a problem. They can't taste it. And the idea being full, and of course, it's not like, people are just sitting around doing nothing. Like, we work 8 hours a day, go home and cut the grass, eat dinner, whatever we do, but they're working like almost 24/7. They obviously have work rest cycles, but it's not like they have a lot of downtime. So they're constantly busy. So that factors in. But one point I wanted to go back, if you think about a way station, building way stations from here to Mars, where the ship would dock with a way station and unload supplies on a transit mission, that's conceivable. I think it's one of the questions were raised from the audience.
Yes.
But if you think about the logistics of building such a system, it's you have the basic system, the craft itself. Then you've got the water and the environmental control, and then the robotics that plant the seeds, cultivate, store the food, package the food. I mean, you're talking about a huge activity. So it might be better to package and ship the material so that when you arrive on Mars, you actually have a lot of different modules already there that you can then either put together or you can go to. It's like going to Safeway or Kroger. You just kind of go, so we're going to go over to this habitat or this vehicle and pick up the food that was shipped 6 months ago.
Okay.
One of the things, let me add to this one, and Scott is being modest here, but one of the things that Scott worries day in, day out is food as a medication, as a pharmaceutical. As we discussed a lot last time, too much of anything can be either kill you or if it's an adequate amount, it keeps you going. If it's too much, it will kill you too, or too little will kill you also. That's true about oxygen. We breathe oxygen, we don't think about it, but too much oxygen can kill you. Too little oxygen can kill you. So it becomes when you go to the hospital and you get oxygen as a treatment. So Scott has to really follow very carefully the nutrition of the astronauts, and he can tell, as a physician monitoring the crews, I can tell you that in short duration missions, because of motion sickness, people intend to eat too much. In long, because of the motion sickness, in long duration, and because of cramped timelines, and they worked very hard, missed the meal to do the experiments on the shuttle and so forth. In long duration missions, you have more time, so you have to be fed right. One of the major problems is that, the red cell mass start to drop in space flight and release a lot of iron in the stores. So nutrition people and the physician do establish new norms for space flight when you don't give as much iron in space as you would on the ground. Leaching calcium in the urine can produce kidney stone, be a risk factor. So they have to manage, the amount of proteins that people take in, and also loss of electrolytes, and provide additional potassium citrate, right?
Wow.
So there are countermeasures, like I talked, that Scott can address much better than any one of us.
Okay. Well, did you want to comment, Scott?
Yeah, just I'll try quickly. Two things. One is, as Dr. Nicogossian mentioned, nutrition always has that bell-shaped curve, that too little is bad, too much is also bad. And again, if we go back through history, there were polar explorers that when they were put in the position of starving and ate the huskies, they died from vitamin A toxicity because the amount of vitamin A that huskies store in their livers. So you always need to worry about the upside.
Wow.
The other thing that was mentioned before, the other issue we really have is that the menus tend to repeat. Right. And that menu boredom gets very tough. And I was, if you pick your favorite meals, pick 8 days worth of food that is your favorite, your steak, your lobster, whatever you've got, you eat that enough times and pretty much you don't want to see the lobster again.
That's a good point.
So
I don't know about that. Lobster's good all the time.
Yeah.
And meals are viewed as, viewed as a good event, as the astronaut report.
Yeah.
Psychologically, that helps to have meals together.
Okay, well, I want to get to a question that Bjorn Larson is asking. It's actually a pretty good one. He's asking, aren't the changes in intestines and muscles and bones and eyes may be beneficial for adapting to microgravity? What real evidence is there for the myth that long-term microgravity would be unhealthy? Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, as a non-physician, you clearly, there are some things the body doesn't need while you're in space, but it's when you get to where you're going.
Yeah, then what?
That's really the real challenge. I mean, I remember a long time ago we talked about how somebody who maybe had a significant lower leg injury, maybe they were paraplegic or something like that. They don't need your legs because you're not standing. It's more about putting a backpack on and getting off of the space shuttle. That's the problem. It's not functioning in space because the body will adapt, but it's the readaptation getting to where you're going, which you're on the surface of Mars or the moon or back here on Earth. That's the challenge. It's not while you're in space.
Chuck is totally right. If you don't use it, you lose it. Right? There's always that formula, and getting there, you want to be able to work. If we are going to go with low gravity or microgravity, what we call weightlessness, getting there, you are going to encounter gravity. So it depends how long you stay. That's why we are pushing the envelope on the space station up to 1 year to see what will happen, after 1 year when people return, given all the things that we do. Thankfully, people do recover when they come back, and resilience is there. The question becomes that given all the countermeasures, we still lose. Some people lose bone, others don't. Some people lose muscle, others don't. They get injuries if they exercise very vigorously, but people return in a relatively healthy state and requires some readaptation, but they do well. So the question becomes how they're going to do in 1/3 gravity or half gravity. We know that people travel 4 days to the moon, and they did okay going out and working. Well, what if they travel for 1 year to Mars or 8 months to Mars? How will they do? Will it be a small step for mankind or humankind, a big broken bone coming down? Probably not, but people will have to be careful.
Well, while you're on that topic, Bjorn also had a question earlier in the chat about injuries. What are some of the worst injuries that astronauts have suffered so far? And he's asking, what are the worst injuries that astronauts have suffered in space, like someone hitting himself on the thumb with a hammer? Any of you guys have any anecdotes about that?
We categorize the number of injuries reported in that blue book, which is sitting behind you.
Yes.
Yes.
They've literally written the book, folks, on this stuff.
we all written. But, there is nothing. They're just small type of things like bruises, small cuts, occasional foreign body gets into the eye in a couple of people. Very few cases of subluxation, a finger getting out of whatever of the joint and putting back in. So there are not there were not severe injuries in space. Even in times where there were, dangerous events like decompression of the module on Mir, and there were small burns on Mir or whatever people have noticed because of the fires. But the interesting part is that nobody came back and had to go straight to the hospital, basically, because of an injury.
Okay, so now one of the things that I've heard a lot about several times through the course of the history of spaceflight has been the exhaustion, especially when it comes out when overexertion or doing things like spacewalks. Some of the earlier astronauts, and I think would get really overexerted with being tired and things like that. And so the reason I want to bring that up is there's a question here from Delu, which I think is a really good one, asking, does NASA have any data on the quality of sleep for the astronauts, or is it not affected in any way while in space? So we've all said they're working hard, everybody's got a lot to do. What kind of sleep are the astronauts able to get?
Well, it's depend on the individuals. In general, they have 8 or 9 hours allocated to sleep. Some of them sleep less, others sleep more. But disruption of sleep basically can be due to circadian rhythms, and some of the accidents which happen in space, especially on the Russian spacecraft, was due to overworking the crew and fatigue that they had from not sleeping enough, because the ground control used to interfere with them and ask them to work very hard. And we've seen that also in Skylab, when the ground control was demanding more and more Earth observation from the third crewed mission. And there was, occasionally there is a tension between ground and flight. But in general, the astronauts do sleep, They report sometimes they have trouble to adapting to sleep when they return because there is gravity. They don't feel in space. You don't feel like that there is you lose the feeling of the gravity. That's why you feel the heaviness. But in space, they usually restrain people so the limbs don't float away. They have sleeping stations. And in general, it's okay. Did I answer the question?
So during if I might add, just during the Aerospace Medical Association meeting this past week here in Denver, they actually talked about the sleeping quarters on the space station, where each astronaut has so many cubic feet of private space where they can sleep and have some mementos and so forth. But going to, and that's okay for this short duration missions, even though they may be 6 months and you can see the Earth out of the window. It's when you go to Mars is that habitation space is going to have to be larger. Because if you're in a small cube, imagine a sleeping bag that you might buy at a sporting goods store, and you're sleeping in that in a tent with 3 other people, and it's a 4-man tent. And you also have your backpacks in there, your cooking utensils, because the bears will get you, you know. And so it's very tight, right? So you have, so again, the people I've talked with, they get a restful night's sleep or day whenever they sleep, but it's not the same as sleeping on Earth. One of the things that Dr. Berry talked about was before Apollo 13, as you know, 2 days before flight, they changed the crew, which was really a very upsetting thing to the crews, the other astronauts within NASA, that they took the crew because the crew had already trained for the Apollo 13 mission, but now they had to spend all this extra time right up to flight to prepare for the mission because they had switched out to Schweigert and Fred Hayes. I guess I always forget the names of those guys, but they switched to one of the crew members out, Ken Mattingly, excuse me, and because he may or may not have had measles, and so that made the crew very tired when they actually launched, and so and then of course all the stuff that happened during that mission, the fatigue was noticed by the flight surgeons. They talk a little bit about that both in the movie Apollo 13, which of course is not necessarily 100% true about what happened. And Dr. Berry clearly mentioned that he had talked with the crew about a variety of different things, and fatigue was one of them. So when you're, and as Arnold pointed out, when you're in the Russian Mir program, when one of the crew members was tired, and you're frustrated with the ground, and you have some systems that aren't working right, you have mishaps happen. And in this case, 2 spacecraft ran into each other, and the loss of pressure and so forth. And we all know what happened after that. So fatigue, obviously is a big issue.
And also the flight surgeons, the crew can ask the flight surgeons to allow them to take a sleeping medication. Usually the people who have flown, the veterans, they do much better than the rookies at the beginning. But in long duration space flight, you adapt and you sleep. It's no different than what happens in the Navy. If you have been in the Navy ships, and I was a lot on aircraft carrier or submarines, the quarters are cramped, and you sleep in a bunk, and it's similar to that, except you don't change the state of the gravity pull or lack of gravity.
But getting to the original question that started all this is: does NASA or anyone have a quantitative way of measuring the quality of sleep a person is getting, or is that still just sort of a subjective thing? You said it's different from person to person, but do we have a way of measuring it?
They have done that as experiments, Tony, and what they have, you guys wear those. I don't. You guys wear those activity watches?
No, I don't wear those either.
You don't? So thank you. I buy you dinner.
That's the last thing I want to know is if I'm only getting enough activity or not.
Well, the experiments use what we call actigraph, which is an daily activity, shows how much movement they have in the sleep, or, how the activity is during the day progressing. And there's a lot of data which is out there. And, they have been measuring, and that has not been a very huge problem at this point.
Okay. John Suffel is commenting, sleeping in zero gravity shouldn't be a problem since psychologically it will be like before we were born and was floating in embryonic fluid. Okay, now I remember seeing, I'm just going to follow up with that. I remember seeing pictures of astronauts in the space shuttle sleeping in those bags, and their arms were like floating up like this and hair was going up. I actually think it would be a great place to sleep, but then I would be worried about all of the people close to me and what my arms might be doing. I don't know that I would get a very good night's sleep on that whole thing. It's really strange. But and I'm going to also just say this. I shouldn't admit this, but I tend to like drool a lot and when I'm sleeping, and so I worry that it would just like go out into the space shuttle or wherever I'm at.
Maybe somebody should take this over from Tony.
Too much information there.
Exactly.
Well, hey, these are things we got to think about. I mean,
Well, also relative to that, somebody told me, a space station astronaut told me how noisy the space station.
Yeah. Very noisy.
Well, it is noisy, and that's one of the things I was going to bring up in the psychological aspects is the deprivation. A lot of the astronauts comment, and it started with the Soviet cosmonauts who flew long-duration missions as opposed to us who flew short-duration mission for a long time. They were saying that they're missing, having the wind on their face. The Russian have a little bit different culturally, that they miss the raindrops, they miss to see change of scenery, they miss, all the noises that you can hear. It's just continuous fans. Oops, I'm sorry.
that's all right.
Not my mic. It's continuous fan hum. That's why I connected it with the Navy. When you go to the Navy cruises, you have this similar situation. And I can tell you a funny story about me and Navy sleeping in those bunks, but I will. It might end up the discussion if I start there. But really, it's you can sleep. After a couple of days, you adapt and you can sleep. But the noise is really, they get earmuffs because the noise can affect the hearing.
And one of the things, Arnold, in our book, there, and I think it's chapter 6, is about acoustics and audition. And so there's a lot of information in that textbook about the noise and the measurement of noise and what the astronauts wear to kind of control that. I think just to go back real quickly on sleeping, I know that Chuck Berry had told the Capcom during Apollo 13 to have the astronauts take some sleeping pills. They had some medication on board so they could get some rest. And even though the temperature dropped down to about 40 degrees in the capsule or in the command module where they had gone to the LEM, that message never got to them. And so the question came up is, why did they stop having private medical conferences with the crew? And so I think in the space station era, obviously the crew surgeons talk with the astronauts, they talk to their families, but on the way to Mars, that delay in communication makes that a little more difficult. Yeah. And so so you have to be more autonomous. And so if you are in fact exhausted and need to take medication, you could probably, somehow communicate with the ground, and in about, 20 minutes to a half hour, maybe an hour later, you'll get a response to say, yeah, go ahead and take that medication. You may have already taken it, or you may have already fell asleep naturally. So, who knows? But I think that's also part of that whole understanding. And the other thing is that we've become accustomed to, like Arnold said, the wind in our face, the raindrops, a warm shower, just a comfortable, no noise at all. You're sitting there reading a book, but it's constantly noisy. There's constantly something going on. And it's you adapt, and you obviously get rest, and you can function in a good way and get your job done. But it's that first few days where it takes to get adapted once you get in space.
Okay, so let me just read a comment here from Cello Fingers. Sleep is a regenerative process. If the crew is overworked, would life-dependent decision-making processes be compromised? They
have been.
That's happened.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing about the mirror. Yeah. I mean, in the U.S., as I understand, I've been reading a couple of reports about mishaps on the U.S. and the Russian side. And on the Russian side, the Russians are paid a certain amount of money, and for every task they do successfully, they get some bonus money. I have no idea. They don't make like U.S. astronauts make a good salary, but they just get paid. They don't get a bonus for doing tasks.
They get paid by the task?
Right. I mean, they get paid at base. It's like a sales. And so what happened was that there's something about if I recall right, the positioning cameras weren't working, so that the progress as it was coming towards the space station, they were going to dock, and so they were supposed to line of sight it, and the guy was tired, frustrated with the ground, and they knew that if they screwed up, they weren't going to get paid, and they needed the money, and the spacecraft, instead of docking, bypassed it and struck the other craft, and that's what caused that mishap. So clearly that was both fatigue and failure of systems. So it's not always just fatigue, but there are multiple multiple players, I suppose, in that scenario.
Okay, so yeah, it's another really important aspect of safety is just making sure you get enough sleep. Okay, so Scott, I have a question for you from, let me hang on just a sec here. I have a question for you from Mark Wood on the chat is asking, how would you accommodate the needs of vegetarian astronauts, especially as more nations take up space travel as costs come down with technology advances? In some cultures, vegetarianism is common. Are you working?
Indeed, and that's one of the challenges we have right now is that we have a food system that we fly, and frankly, it will not support someone down a vegetarian diet. There are a few items that are vegetarian that are available, but not enough to sustain you for a 6-month mission, and it's just not there. Could we do it? It could be done. But again, that's just not where we are now. We've had a few.
It's not necessarily a cultural thing only, either, is it? I mean, these are, I don't know. There's ways of getting protein, for example, that don't involve getting meats. And so, do you guys research those foods as well?
Indeed, and we've flown again. There've been a few tofu-based items that they've flown, and beans and other types of foods. There are a few of them. There's just not enough to sustain all the requirements that you have.
And this goes, I guess, back to the psychological issues too. I mean, think about it, humans are really needy, aren't we? One of the when you think about the old sailors on ships, they traveled on their, armies traveled on their stomach. It's always been, food has a huge impact on our well-being, our own mental state. If we're well fed, we're enjoying our food, then we tend to be happier. And this issue of, I didn't even think about it until we had this hangout, redundancy, just the same old crap every single day. You really want to mix it up. You really want to get a wide variety up there. Are we doing that now with the space station, Scott? I mean, are we mixing it up a little bit, or are the choices kind of limited with what they're having up there now?
We're doing what we can, but indeed the choices are limited, and that the crews.
Do they complain?
The most common comment we get when they get back is that variety was very important.
Okay.
We are flying crews from other countries, and they tend to bring a small stash of Japanese food, European food. Even the Canadians bring food, and they do. They relish anything that's different. So that is and more often than not, we've had a lot of crews that before flight, when we talked to them and said, look, you get a few containers of things that you want. What do you want to put in there? We had a number of crew members that said, look, I don't care. Just fill it up. It doesn't matter to me. They came back after flight and said, boy, I should have paid a lot more attention to that because food was a lot more important than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's not really food. It's not food-based. I mean, it's not a food. It's actually a drug. And one of the Japanese crew members on, I think it was STS-49, wanted to take this particular drug, and it came in a vacuum pack, like normal drugs do, and it was for digestive, like a Tums kind of thing, or Zantac, something that would for an upset stomach. And when you open it up, it smells like carbon disulfide. Now, there was a big challenge because the carbon disulfide interacts with the lithium hydroxide canisters on the shuttle, which take out CO2. So you have to be very careful with not only is the food nutritious, but it also can't have certain chemicals that might interfere with other parts.
That's a good point.
Right? It's a whole thing on flying on Delta Airlines. There are no peanuts because one patient or one person has a peanut allergy, so no peanuts on the whole plane.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got to be very careful about not only the taste and the volume of this food takes up, but also that it doesn't interact with the systems.
Well, Charles, Mr. Doarn brings a great point. There are certain things which are prohibited. For example, cleaning the environment on a space station. We don't bring the space station back. It always stays there. But cleaning the environment, you cannot use alcohol sponges because it stays in the environment. And whatever you introduce stays there, gets absorbed in the surfaces and can become toxic after a certain time. Some of the countries had to, other countries had to abandon the space stations because either of toxicology or because of overgrowth of bacteria inside the space station, and that becomes a problem in the long range, and that's why people look at the space station, how much of biological experiments we are doing, but really living, working in low Earth orbit becomes an important tool because you can do several things. One, you can look at the aging materials. How long you can have materials which can age, when they start to fall apart, can they survive for 20 years or, I don't know, 6 years, 3 years or whatever. Build the inflatable structures, which are very useful and attached now, developed by Bigelow, attached to the space station. Would they last longer, better than metal core spacecraft? How long before the interior of the spacecraft is deteriorating? If you talk to the astrobiologists, you will find out that bacteria eat everything, and they can start destroying the inside of the space station. And bacteria change their activity. So bacteria eats through iron, through anything you can think about, very adaptable.
Which brings up a question back to either Scott or Chuck about how long materials last. Read a little bit about this. What's the current, gentlemen, what's the current best results in terms of how nutritious the foods that you all pack up last? How long does their nutritional value last?
You're asking about the expiration date?
Basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, and again, the current, what we call design reference mission for Mars with respect to food is that the food will actually go to Mars first, and that the food will be on Mars before the crew leaves Earth. So the food scientists are trying to build a food system that will last for 5 years.
Wow.
Because that's the planned duration.
Doesn't the military kind of help with that too? Haven't they done a lot of work? I mean, anybody who's ever eaten an MRE, meal ready to eat, knows that that's been around for a while. But they're reasonably nutritious, I think, aren't they? So there's some research been done on that kind of thing, right?
There's been a lot of behavioral research done to show that you shouldn't eat nothing but MREs for too long.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
and indeed, nutrient degradation and shelf life is a big deal.
Okay.
And that's one of the biggest challenges we have.
Okay, well, I want to move on a little bit here because we've only got a few more minutes, and I want to talk about the free time a little bit. And GPI sick, I think is how you pronounce it. Sorry about that if I messed it up. How much free time do astronauts have, and is there a healthy portion they need to have to not get psychological problems? Now, we talked about this a little bit before we started the Hangout about the games, diversions. Do they get free time?
Yes. But they do something.
That's it?
Yes.
Okay.
2 minutes every day.
Next question.
Okay, well, thank you.
That's
Thank you,
easy.
Arnold.
The days are actually programmed in advance as experimental work, housekeeping, repairs goes in that, and then personal exercise, which one is mandated exercise for health maintenance, and then personal exercise if they want to do it, and then there is sleep time, and there is time for meals. It's very well choreographed and rehearsed, controlled time period that you have, how much you have free time. And there is free time pulled in, and it depends on the time, especially in long duration missions, you have more free time than in short duration missions. And that's important. So the crew can go and do things on their own, listen to music, look at Earth. One of the things that people really enjoy in space, they always report, and you can see from the tweet from astronauts and cosmonauts, and not the cosmonauts, but basically Canadian astronauts and European astronauts, they always like to look at Earth, and they send pictures from Earth because it's ever-changing environment. And I'm laughing because Earth is so dynamic and so interesting that they're looking at it. And you go on the Twitter and you can see that every crew members, most of the crew members, do tweet all the information about what they see, lightnings and things like that. That's part of the psychological support and part of communication with people, talking to schools, and there is built-in free time. Will it use it as a free time, or will you spend time playing music like some of them did, concert from space, or communicating with their relatives to do that? And it depends. But they have also time built in to look at the next couple of days where they go over the schedule, what they have to do, because they are scheduled things like repairs and things which have to be worked. So a regulated time schedule, basically rehearsed before flight and discussed, does work all the time. And the ground control is always on top of doing some of the chores, taking away from the astronaut. So the question will become, one of the major questions about performance, how the task will be partitioned when you go to Mars and you cannot have the ground control interface with real time. I don't know if Chuck and
I was going to comment.
Scott want to address that.
Well, I was going to comment in the shuttle, in the American program, the schedule for the daily activities was very designed and very strict. Well, maybe strict's not the right word. In the Russian program, they were given a list, and that's primary of things to do that day. And that's very simplified way of putting it, but that's because of the communication, the lack of communication in the Russian program, because of where the ground terminals were and so forth. So I think the best thing for the United States was to partner with Russia on Mir. You had to go in a different inclination off the Kennedy Space Center, 28 degrees versus 56 degrees to get to the Mir. The International Space Station is also a different inclination. So the communication protocols are a little different. And so as we move to a Mars profile mission, there's going to be a set of tasks that must be done every day, cleaning, maintenance, and so forth. But the work schedules will be they'll be more autonomous. And I think that's one of the lessons that we've learned from Mir and the International Space Station is, and the United States program was very strictly controlled on what happened in each hour. And in the Russian program was not as regulated or structured, but nevertheless, they still had a lot of things to do. And going forward to Mars, you're going to have that same kind of thing where you're going to be more autonomous and have more control over your daily schedule. And
I can also imagine you would have a lot more downtime, just if nothing else on the trip there. There's only so much you can do in a day, right? So it's probably going to be a lot more downtime. Now, I want to bring this up because you guys reminded me of it before we started the Hangout. Are there any plans for like diversions, games? Like, I know weight is always an issue. You can't bring a lot of board games, but are there any kind of diversions that are, that astronauts say they'd like to have, or are that you guys are thinking about when they're on their way? Like, I know computer games would probably be something that could play without a whole lot of extra weight, but
Angry Birds.
Because you guys mentioned this too. The astronauts themselves are rather competitive, so they might want to do some kind of gaming or do something as a diversion, right?
But if you think about games and just use the iPhone as an example, 10 years ago, no such thing as iPhone. By the time we go to Mars, the board games we have today will all be on some kind of device. They may be more like a virtual reality. They may be those I can't think of that.
Augmented reality.
Yeah, it's projected. So it's there's no monitor. It's just projected holograms, and so there's going to be a completely different gaming systems. We're not talking about every astronaut having an Xbox and a controller, but the kinds of games that they might play might still be Catan or playing cards, but there might also be some really amazing virtual reality tools that they can use and put heads-up display on and actually walk through a park or go sailing or something like that.
I was just trying to imagine as you were talking about what it would actually be like in zero-G to play a board game. Be somewhat annoying, I would imagine, or even cards. Having the cards.
Games are becoming Games are becoming a very important tool in health maintenance and intellectual alertness and performance. And there are even magazines called Games for Life. You using gaming. So gaming is becoming a very, besides Angry Birds, they're becoming a very important tool to teach. And,
I like Angry Birds.
You like? I do too. But there are tools. Those are tools which teach you how to cope with things. And the crews will have very sophisticated computers. Some of them can use those. There's, Lord knows, there is a lot of laptops and personal computers on board the space station, and the Orion is loaded with high tech or new technology, which will be old by then. That can be adapted to play psychological games, training, rehearse. One of the things will be how the crews will have to rehearse what they're going to do when they reach Mars, and what they have to rehearse how to do repairs. So they do that on the space station and evaluate. I don't know. Did I say it correctly, Scott?
Yeah, it all sounded good to me.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad that it sounds good to you.
All right, well, we're almost out of time, but I want to get to one more thing because we mentioned it at the top of the Hangout. Harley was talking about the Deep Space Network, and you also were talking earlier about using social media on the International Space Station as a way of reducing stress and being an activity that they as a diversion and something that contributes to mental health. Although I'm not so sure how social media and mental health are going to be related in the future.
Contribute. That design might be different. Right?
Yeah,
Positive or negative.
yeah, that's right. I know my experience with social media isn't exactly always contributing positively to my mental health. But getting to the Deep Space Network, basically, is there going to be any? You're going to Mars. It's going to be different than on the International Space Station. Bandwidth is kind of an issue. What kind of internet are we looking at here going forward? Harley mentioned other countries getting involved in going to Mars. So we're going to need, is the internet going to be an important aspect?
Yeah, I think that NASA, out of Goddard, in Harley's backyard, signed an agreement with Google to improve the upload and download rate of information for the GSN. Is that true, Harley?
You're muted, Harley.
Wasn't I think that was NASA Ames. Not sure.
I don't know.
It would seem to be the kind of thing that NASA Ames would do.
But they're trying to improve. Yeah, it takes a long time, for example, to download an image from a robotic spacecraft, and the reason is because the GSN has been designed way back, and Deep Space Network, it's at JPL, I think. It's managed out of JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and it takes hours to download a couple of an image. I don't remember. It's 5 kilobytes download. I don't remember now.
Yeah, I think it's 15 kilobytes.
15 kilobytes. Okay.
Dial-up speeds.
But it's very slow process. That's why it takes a couple of days to release some of the pictures from Cassini, Saturn, or other places. So they're trying to improve the rate of return. But people were talking about the planetary internet, where you can. Well, you cannot go faster than speed of light anyhow today, but we'll make it more robust and to put relay satellites and things like that throughout the solar system and on Mars.
Right, there are large efforts to do, next generation space relay using either RF or even optical communications, right, for doing that. And I think what we talked about is that all the need for communication is just going to grow. And so I think there's really indeed the need for some overhaul of the communication system, ultimately, if you want to colonize the solar system, really.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's up to the task of a lot of traffic getting back and forth from Mars, for sure. So
that's actually something we could have a hangout talking about the communications, because it's quite fascinating, actually.
Yeah, we can have a hangout about a lot of this. We didn't even get close to all the topics I wanted to talk about in this hangout. So I hope we're going to continue to revisit this, Harley and Alberto and Arnold and everyone else, because we have so much more to talk about. We didn't even get a chance to.
We love to be on your network.
Well, thank you. I love having you here.
We're going to have you back next month. I think next month Arnold and Chuck and Steve, I think you guys, or some new folks will be coming back. But yes, this whole issue of keeping people alive and productive and going to Mars is a really important topic.
Okay.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great. Thank you all very much. So on behalf of my guests, Dr. Chuck Doarn, Dr. Arnauld Nicogossian, as well as Dr. Scott Smith from NASA Johnson, I want to thank all of you guys for joining us. And on behalf of, I want to thank all of you for the great questions. Next week, join us next Thursday for an Astro Coffee Hangout. Dr. Carol Christian will be back with me. We're going to be talking about some recent papers that have come out. I don't have it in front of me on what it is. She's already got it planned, but we have a lot of things coming up. In addition, we might have some people from the Europa, NASA's Europa project, where we're going to be talking about that as well. So these are all upcoming topics on the Astro Coffee Hangout. Thank you all very much for watching. On behalf of Alberto, Conti.
Can I mention something on the food?
Okay, go right ahead.
That's for basically for Scott. This morning I heard on the news that they develop a new bagel which has 1/3% of caffeine, and they put the egg, so you have the bagel, an omelet, and caffeine also in the morning in the bagel.
That's all. It's all in there. One thing.
My ancestors are turning into the grave. That's not food. But
all right. Okay. Well, and so Harley, hold that up. I didn't have you up when you were showing our mascot.
Here's the yellow ducky.
That's right, our gravitational rubber ducky. That's our mascot for our hangout. So thank you. We should have a contest to come up with a name for that little guy. All righty, guys. Thank you all very much for watching. I will see you next month. We'll be talking more on getting to Mars, the health effects, as well as the physiological and mental challenges that all of the astronauts might face getting us to Mars. So on behalf of all my guests and Harley and Alberto, thank you all so much for watching. And as always, keep looking up.
May the force be with you.
Oh, may the fourth.